Hey guys, we're gonna be talking about film, tourism. Okay, I'm just gonna stop imitating his accent and just actually talk about what I'm getting graded for now. Today I'm gonna be discussing the director Taika Waititi and how he effectively proves to be an auteur while escaping the stereotypical idea of what a non-white filmmaker should be making. Now you may ask, Alessia, how are you gonna prove that? Well, to be honest, I kind of thought you would just take my word for it. Just kidding. I'm going to be showing examples through 3 of Taika's films. Number 1, Boy. Number 2, What We Do in the Shadows, which he co-directed with Jermaine Clement. And number 3, Jojo Rabbit. I think this is a good range of films to discuss because not only is there a film from earlier in his career, a quite recent film, and one that's kind of in between the two, but also because I don't think I'll be able to talk about any more in my time limit. So my thesis that I stated earlier sounds quite eloquent and like something that my high school English teacher would be proud that I made, but let me explain how I'm actually going to prove this. First, I'm going to discuss auteurism and how Taika has a unique style while still being versatile in genre, and how his ability to add humor to all of his films is an impressive trait that isn't easily done. Then we will discuss how Taika Waititi breaks the boundaries of what is expected of a non-white filmmaker, and how he is disrupting the white-dominated industry's ideals, along with his effortless ability to still include his heritage in so many of his films, in a way that is completely fresh, exciting, and entertaining. Now let's discuss the general plot of each film, and yes, there will be spoilers. Boy is about a young boy, nicknamed Boy. His father re-enters his life after many years, and Boy believes his father is a really great man, but he's honestly more of a loser in a gang of 3 people. The film follows Boy as, at first, he actually enjoys this new life with his father, but eventually this perfect dad persona that he has in his head starts to break down. It sounds really sad, I know, but it's actually really funny, and we'll be discussing more about that later. What We Do in the Shadows is a mockumentary about vampires' lives. That's it. That's the best synopsis I can give you. Also, super funny. And lastly, Jojo Rabbit follows a boy named Jojo who lives during World War II. He very much agrees with Nazi ideology at the beginning of the film, and his imaginary friend is literally Hitler. So yeah, Jojo likes Nazis. He finds a Jewish girl who his mother has been hiding in his house to protect her. And throughout the film, he grows to understand her and not view her as Nazis view Jewish people. Let's get into the actual argument of this essay, shall we? Andrew Sarris, in his work Notes on the Auteur Theory in 1962, explains it like this. The 3 premises of the auteur theory may be visualized as 3 concentric circles. The outer circle as technique, the middle circle personal style, and the inner circle interior meaning. A more concise definition of it, which sounds a lot like the definition I heard in my first year film class, comes from Britannica and states, auteur theory of filmmaking in which a director is viewed as the major creative force in a motion picture. One thing I always notice in his films is his use of cutaways and flashbacks. Here's an example from Boy.
Kia ora, my name is Boy, and welcome to my interesting world. Auntie Gracie is my mum's sister. She has lots of jobs. She's the tennis coach, the mailman, the school bus driver, and she runs the local shop. My dad's not here right now. He's a busy man. He's a master carver, deep sea treasure diver, the captain of the rugby team, and he holds the record for punching out the most people with one hand.
This is the intro to the film. The use of cutaways pokes fun at his lifestyle in a small town, but it also introduces the audience to the perception that Boy has of his father. It sets us up to believe that he has a great relationship with his dad. And now an example from What We Do in the Shadows.
One day I was selling my wares, and I walked past this old creepy castle, and I look at it and think, very old and creepy, and then this creature flies at me.
The flashbacks and cutaways are used properly. It's a mockumentary style film, so having visuals that allude back to what the documented subjects are talking about is incredibly useful. But as an auteur, he knows when and when not to use his signature stylistic element, such as in Jojo Rabbit, where this technique isn't really used. But it makes sense. Having cutaways wouldn't advance the plot at all, and the backstory is clear through dialogue and the nature of the time period the film is presented in, which is World War II. so people have a general understanding of the political climate and ideologies of the time, causing there to be no need for any flashbacks. His cinematic style is evident despite the genre that he's filming. The 3 films I'm talking about all vary in genre. Boy is a family drama, coming-of-age story comedy. What We Do in the Shadows is a mockumentary-style comedy. And Jojo Rabbit is historical fiction, coming-of-age comedy. Did you notice what elements are in each of those films? Comedy. Yeah, they all have humor in them, whether it's completely driven by humor or humor just supports the film. Further, he's able to add comedy in areas that most films have trouble doing. Like I mentioned, Boy has a kind of sad-sounding synopsis, but despite the family drama issues it seems to portray, it's basically a comedy throughout. As you can tell from previous clips, What We Do in the Shadows is basically a comedy on its own, so we're gonna skip straight to Jojo Rabbit. You may be wondering, how could someone make a film about Nazis funny? Great question, because it seems almost contradictory. But Jojo Rabbit is an incredible example of how Taika's style flourishes. He adds comedy where you wouldn't expect it to work. But first, I definitely think he makes use of awkward comedy. Such as in Boy, when he shows the dad doing something that should be really cool, but he honestly just ends up looking stupid. What We Do in the Shadows also exhibits a lot of this awkwardness. His concepts and scripts are inherently funny, but the shooting decisions like long takes and the sheer embarrassment of characters is clearly his comedic trope.
Ooh, look, a ghost cap floating all by itself.
So how does this translate to Jojo Rabbit? Because it's not really an awkward comedy. But the comedy from this film comes from imitation. A professor of mine said something along the lines of, mimicry automatically makes something funny. That's exactly what Taika does. For goodness sakes, he makes a film where a child's best friend is an imaginary Hitler. He's completely satirizing Nazi ideology and Hitler youth. He's taking such an absurd time in history and actually showing how crazy it was.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
People used to say a lot of nasty things about me. Oh, this guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that psycho. He's gonna get us all killed.
Benjamin Franz said in his scholarly review of the film that, thus, Waititi capably and cleverly skewers the otherwise serious and deadly Nazis and endows them with great comic goofiness. This made the film palatable to watch. What Franz is saying is really interesting, because his use of comedy makes difficult topics less difficult. Both Boy and Jojo Rabbit, at their very core, are serious topics, but the humorous approach makes them almost playful. When I think of Taika Waititi, I don't associate him with any specific genre. I associate him with the ability to create any genre in his own interpretation. Now, I'm not really a superhero movie watcher, and I honestly tried to watch Thor Ragnarok, which Taika Waititi directed, but I didn't get through it because I'm not in the superhero movie world, so I didn't really get it. However, just from watching the first 20 minutes of the film, his style is evident. In the very first scene where Thor is dangling upside down, it's kind of like a suspenseful moment, and then the rope keeps like awkwardly turning him around, which cuts through the suspense to awkwardness and back and forth. It's just really funny and it's very Taika. In my thesis, I explained that I would discuss how Taika Waititi has a different approach to filmmaking than what people would expect a non-white filmmaker to do. Another professor of mine who is not white said something along the lines of how, when you're a non-white filmmaker, everyone expects you to make films that discuss how you are not white. Almost as if the only valid thing one can make is a film that portrays the hardships of not being white. Now, this is not to discredit films that discuss hardships at all. Films of that nature have their place for sure. The thing that's unfortunate is how it is thought to be the only type of film non-white filmmakers are allowed to make. When I think of these films, typically they are quite serious and deal with subject matter from a somber perspective. Filmmakers can't make stories about things that any person can deal with, no matter their skin color. What I love about Taika is how he chooses to not do what is expected. But I basically already discussed his lack of sappy films in favor for comedies, so let's discuss another element of this idea. Yes, he doesn't make films about the hardships of not being white, but he still does integrate his heritage in his movies. Just a quick bio on Taika so we can understand his heritage. He's from New Zealand and his background is Russian Jewish, Maori, and a small amount Irish and French Canadian. So starting with Boy. The whole film takes place in a small town in New Zealand, which again is where Taika's from. This writing by Joe Smith begins by discussing a review Peter DeBruge had on the film Boy. According to DeBruge, Waititi's investment in 1980s global culture, pop icon Michael Jackson, empties out a more desirable form of indigenous cultural expression.
Wanna see some Michael Jackson dance moves?
And I'm gonna quote Joe Smith once again because I feel that he explains it perfectly, and it also shows that I didn't make this concept up. So he says that this reveals the ongoing expectations placed on Maori creatives to represent a particular notion of indigeneity. The idea that he shouldn't have shown these pop culture references and should have focused more on traditional Maori culture shows how non-white filmmakers are placed in a box that requires them to portray their ethnicity in the proper way. Clearly, this idea doesn't bother Taika at all because he continues to do exactly what he did in Boy in his future films. What We Do in the Shadows is a less obvious example of this idea, but it does take place in New Zealand as well. He is merging the overall concept of the film, Vampires' Lives, and placing it in the country he's from. He stays true to his roots, but doesn't just make a film about those roots. Like mentioned, Jojo Rabbit takes place in World War II and discusses the anti-Semitic views of certain people of the time. Taika is of Russian Jewish descent, so again, it makes sense for him to make a film of this nature. But in true Taika fashion, he doesn't just make another World War II film that discusses the terrible things that happened at the time. He makes a comedy. Again, there's nothing wrong with films that discuss serious topics from a serious lens. But what Taika is doing is trying to make something that isn't like what's expected of him. Once again, taking part of his background and using it as a base for his films, but taking the story in a totally different direction than anyone else would make. Every ethnic heritage has its own internal quirks and jokes that they in fact find funny. And to an extent, it is as though this is what Taika does in his films. He takes his Jewish heritage and makes a comedy about World War II, and he takes a location in New Zealand and plants vampires in it. And he's incredibly successful in doing this. Caroline Gross explains that to achieve this level of national popularity alone, it is clear his films are crossing boundaries within their local audiences, not simply appealing to that niche within the local culture. So yeah, Taika is taking the standards and flipping them right on their head while showing his versatility and style. Throughout this essay, we've discussed how Taika Waititi is an auteur through his versatility and style. And we've discussed how he's an incredibly innovative director by breaking the boundaries of what is expected of him. Alright guys, I hope this convinced you all to go and watch every single one of his films. I can't do a New Zealand accent. Okay, bye!